My name's Sarah, and I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Dad worked 2 jobs, and Mom cleaned houses to make ends meet. I remember watching them count pennies at the kitchen table, trying to figure out how to pay the bills. I tried to help out where I could. I'd babysit the neighbors' kids or mow lawns in the summer. Every little bit counted. School was my escape. I buried myself in books and threw myself into every subject. My teachers noticed. "Sarah, you've got a real gift," Mrs. Johnson, my favorite English teacher, told me one day. "Keep this up, and you could get a scholarship to college." That became my goal. I'd stay up late studying, determined to make something of myself and help my parents. Our next-door neighbors were a different story. The Millers were what you'd call a dysfunctional family. Mrs. Miller was always yelling, her shrill voice carrying through the thin walls of our duplex. Mr. Miller was quieter, but he didn't work and spent most of his time drinking on the front porch. Their son, Jack, was in my class. He was a quiet kid, always hunched over like he was trying to disappear. No one really talked to him at school. One day, I saw him sitting alone at lunch, and something made me walk over. We started talking, and I realized Jack was actually pretty smart. He had a dry sense of humor that made me laugh, and he was great at math. "You want help with your algebra?" he offered one day when he saw me struggling. From then on, we became steady buddies. Jack was different from his parents, kind, thoughtful, and eager to learn. We'd spend hours talking about our dreams for the future. "I want to work with computers," he told me one day. "Create things that can change the world." "I want to fly," I admitted. "See the world from above." He grinned. "You'd make a great flight attendant." As we got older, our friendship deepened. Jack became my confidant, the person I turned to when things got tough at home. One day Mrs. Miller was gone. She'd run off with some rich guy she met online, leaving Jack and his dad behind. Jack tried to act like it didn't bother him, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. "Maybe it's for the best," he said, his voice hollow. I hugged him tight, wishing I could take away his pain. As senior year approached, college applications loomed. I threw myself into every extracurricular activity I could, determined to get that scholarship. The day the acceptance letters arrived, I tore mine open with shaking hands. Full ride to State University. I ran next door to tell Jack, but his dad answered. "Jack's not here," he slurred. "Left for some tech school out west." Didn't even say goodbye. That fall, I left for college with a mixture of excitement and sadness. Jack and I had drifted apart, and now he was gone without a word. College life was a whirlwind. I threw myself into my accounting studies, determined to make the most of my scholarship. But even as I crunched numbers and balanced books, a part of me yearned for something else. One day, I found myself staring out the window of my dorm room, watching a plane streak across the sky. That old dream came rushing back, to be up there, among the clouds. 4 years flew by, and before I knew it, I was back in my hometown, fresh degree in hand. My parents were so proud. "Our little girl," the accountant, Dad beamed, hugging me tight. I forced a smile, not ready to burst their bubble just yet. That night, I took a walk down my old street. I paused in front of the Miller's house, memories flooding back. The place looked abandoned, weeds overtaking the yard. "If you're looking for the Millers, they're long gone," Mrs. Thompson, the neighborhood gossip, called from her porch. I walked over. "What happened?" "Old man Miller passed about a year after you left for college." Drink finally got him, she clucked her tongue. "That son of theirs never showed up for the funeral. No one's heard from him since." I pushed thoughts of Jack aside and focused on my secret plan. I'd found a flight attendant training program nearby. It wasn't easy juggling my new accounting job and the classes, but every time I felt like giving up, I'd remember that feeling of watching planes soar overhead. 6 months later, I stood in front of my parents, hands shaking as I held out my flight attendant license. "I've been taking classes," I stammered. "To become a flight attendant." It's what I've always wanted to do. There was a long silence. Then Dad spoke up. Is this really what you want, sweetheart? I nodded, tears in my eyes. To my surprise, they both hugged me. Then we're proud of you, Mom said. Just promise you'll visit often. 2 weeks later, I was on my first flight as a trainee. As the plane lifted off, I felt a thrill run through me. This was where I belonged. The next 2 years were a blur of cities, countries, and faces. Then came the flight that changed everything. It was a routine trip from New York to Las Vegas. I was doing my usual pre-flight checks when I heard a familiar voice. Excuse me, where's the nearest exit? I turned, and my heart stopped. There, standing in front of me, was Jack. He looked different, sharper, more polished. But those kind eyes were the same. He recognized me at the same moment. Sarah, is that you? Jack, I breathed. Well, it's been so long. We stared at each other, years of unspoken words hanging between us. Then the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, snapping us back to reality. I have to finish my checks, I said quickly. But maybe we can talk later? He nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. I'd like that. As soon as the seatbelt sign turned off, I made my way down the aisle, my heart pounding. Jack was in seat 14C, his eyes lighting up as I approached. We chatted as much as we could during the flight, catching up in bits and pieces between my duties. Jack told me he was working in IT now, something to do with casino software. He seemed different, more confident, successful. As we began our descent into Las Vegas, Jack scribbled his number on a napkin. Let's catch up properly. Dinner tomorrow? I hesitated for a second, then took the napkin. I'd like that. The next evening, I found myself sitting across from Jack in a cozy restaurant off the strip. The years melted away as we talked, laughed, and remembered. As the night went on, I felt that old connection reigniting. Jack was still the same kind, intelligent guy I'd known, but there was a new edge to him, a drive that was almost magnetic. We started seeing each other regularly. Jack's work kept him in Vegas, and I managed to swap shifts to spend more time there. It felt like we were making up for lost time. As the weeks turned into months, I watched in awe as Jack's success grew. He was in demand, his company expanding rapidly. And through it all, our relationship deepened. One evening, after a particularly successful deal, Jack took me to the top of the stratosphere. As we looked out over the glittering city, he turned to me, his eyes shining. Sarah, he said, getting down on one knee. You've been my best friend, my support, my everything. Will you marry me? Tears sprang to my eyes. Yes, I whispered. Yes, I will. Our wedding was everything I'd ever dreamed of, elegant, joyous, and filled with love. As we danced under the stars, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Little did I know, our perfect world was about to be shattered. The day that would change everything started like any other. I was home, enjoying a rare day off, when there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. There, standing in the hallway, was a face I'd hoped never to see again. Well, drawled a familiar voice. Aren't you going to invite your mother-in-law in? Jack's mother sauntered into our apartment, her eyes darting around greedily. I stood frozen, watching as she ran her fingers over our furniture, examining everything. Nice place you've got here, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Is it owned or rented? Before I could respond, Jack walked in from the bedroom. He stopped short, his face a mixture of shock and something else. Was it fear? Mom, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? She turned, a wide smile plastering her face. Jackie, my boy. Can't a mother visit her successful son? Jack seemed to shake himself out of his stupor. Of course, it's been 15 years. Oh, details, she waved her hand dismissively. Now, tell me about this lovely home. How much did it set you back? I watched, bewildered, as Jack answered her. $2,500,000. Her eyes widened, a look of pure joy spreading across her face. My. And what other properties do you own, son? The next few hours were excruciating. Jack's mother peppered him with questions about his finances, his business, his assets. Jack answered everything, seemingly unable to refuse her. Finally, as evening approached, I thought she'd leave. Instead, she dropped a bombshell. "Well, I'm exhausted," she announced. "Jackie, be a dear and show me to the guest room. I'll be staying here for a while." I looked to Jack, expecting him to say something, to refuse. But he just nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Of course, Mom. I'll get your bags." That night, as we lay in bed, I turned to Jack. "Are you really okay with this? After everything she did? How she treated you?" "People change," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Let's just give it a chance, okay?" The next few weeks were hell. Jack's mother, Veronica, she insisted I call her, was a nightmare. She criticized everything I did, from my cooking to my job. "A flight attendant," she scoffed one day. "Couldn't you find a real career?" I bit my tongue, reminding myself to be civil for Jack's sake. But it was hard. Veronica acted like an angel around Jack, all smiles and motherly concern. But the moment he left for work, the mask would drop. One day, as I was preparing to leave for a flight, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Listen here, girl," she hissed, all pretense gone. "I know what you're after. My son's money. I've seen gold diggers like you before. But let me tell you something, that money is mine. I raised that boy, and I deserve it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You abandoned him," I spat. "You have no right." "I have every right," she cut me off. "And unless you want me to make your life very difficult, you'll do exactly as I say." "What are you talking about?" Her eyes gleamed with malice. "You're going to pay me $10,000 a month." I felt sick. "You're insane. I'm not paying you anything." She shrugged. "Your choice. But don't say I didn't warn you." As I left for my flight that day, my mind was reeling. I knew I had to tell Jack, but would he believe me? And what would Veronica do if I exposed her? The next few weeks were a blur of tension and unease. I tried to talk to Jack about his mother's behavior, but he always brushed it off. I started taking longer flights, volunteering for routes that would keep me away from home for days at a time. It was cowardly, I knew, but I couldn't stand the atmosphere in our once happy home. One day, after a particularly long flight to Tokyo, I returned home to find Jack waiting for me, his face ashen. "We need to talk," he said, his voice cold. He handed me a manila envelope. Inside were photos of me, in my flight attendant uniform, kissing a man I'd never seen before. "What is this?" I gasped, my hands shaking. "You tell me," Jack said, his voice trembling with anger. "My mother found these. She's been trying to tell me for weeks that you were unfaithful, but I didn't believe her. Until now." I felt like I was drowning. "Jack, these are fake. Your mother is setting me up. She threatened me, said she'd make me pay if I didn't give her money." Jack's face hardened. "And now you're trying to blame my mother? She was right about you all along." He pulled out a stack of papers from his briefcase and slammed them on the table. "Divorce papers," he said flatly. "I want you out of this house by the end of the week." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This couldn't be happening. "Jack, wait. There's something else you need to know. I'm pregnant." For a moment, I saw a flicker of emotion cross his face. Then it was gone, replaced by a mask of anger and betrayal. "Convenient timing," he spat. "But how do I know it's even mine? For all I know, it could be your pilot friend's." With that, he stormed out, leaving me alone with my shattered world. I sank to the floor, sobs racking my body. How had everything gone so wrong? And what was I going to do now? As if summoned by my despair, Veronica appeared in the doorway, a triumphant smirk on her face. Well, she drawled. Looks like the little gold digger's plan backfired. I looked up at her, anger replacing my sorrow. You did this. You set me up. She shrugged, not even bothering to deny it. I told you I'd make your life difficult if you didn't play ball. You should have listened. With that, she sauntered out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As I packed my bags that night, my hand rested on my still flat stomach. I had more than just myself to think about now. I had to fight for my child. I stood on my parents' porch, my hand shaking as I rang the doorbell. When Mom opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. Sarah? What's wrong, honey? I burst into tears, collapsing into her arms. Between sobs, I managed to explain what had happened. Mom and Dad listened in stunned silence. You'll stay here, Dad said firmly when I'd finished. We'll figure this out together. The next few months were a blur. Unable to fly due to my pregnancy, I took a job working remotely as an accountant for Mom's friend, Linda. The work was mind-numbing, but it kept me afloat financially and gave me something to focus on besides my shattered life. 7 months after leaving Las Vegas, I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. I named him Michael, after my grandfather. As I held him in my arms, I felt a fierce love and protectiveness I'd never experienced before. I'll make this right, I whispered to him. I promise. But even as I settled into motherhood, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The photos, Veronica's sudden reappearance, the way Jack had refused to listen to me, it all felt too calculated. One sleepless night, as I rocked Michael, I made a decision. I was going to fight back. The next day, I hired a private detective, a no-nonsense woman named Rita. I need you to follow my former mother-in-law, I told her. Something's not right, and I need proof. For weeks, I waited anxiously for news. Finally, Rita called. You're gonna want to hear this, she said grimly. I listened in horror as Rita played back recordings of Veronica's conversations with a man she called her sugar daddy. The truth was even worse than I'd imagined. Veronica was on the verge of bankruptcy, drowning in loans she couldn't repay. Her plan was to use Jack to clear her debts, then get rid of him and take everything. I've got it all worked out, Veronica's voice crackled through the speaker. Once Jackie signs over everything to me, we'll stage a little accident. His new wife will take the fall, and we'll be set for life, baby. My blood ran cold. Jack was in danger, and he had no idea. There's more, Rita said. She's got a new bride picked out for your ex. Some girl who's in on the scheme, but doesn't know about the accident part. I felt sick. The total value of Jack's assets was estimated at $15 million. Veronica was willing to destroy multiple lives for that money. With shaking hands, I dialed Jack's number. It went straight to voicemail. Jack, it's Sarah. Please, you have to listen to me. You're in danger. Your mother. The line beeped, cutting me off. I tried again and again, but he never picked up. Panic rising in my throat, I turned to Rita. What do I do now? She looked at me gravely. You've got 2 choices. You can turn this evidence over to the police, or what? Or you can take matters into your own hands. Sometimes, to save someone, you've got to do it yourself. I looked down at Michael, peacefully sleeping in his crib. Then I thought of Jack, the boy who'd been my best friend, the man I'd loved, now unknowingly walking into a deadly trap. My jaw set with determination. I'm going back to Las Vegas. As I stepped off the plane in Las Vegas, the familiar heat hit me like a wall. But I didn't have time to acclimate. I had a mission. My first stop was to meet Jack's fiancée. I'd managed to get her address from Rita, and now I stood outside her apartment, heart pounding. Taking a deep breath, I knocked. The woman who opened the door was beautiful, but looked tired and stressed. Her eyes widened when she saw me. You're Sarah, aren't you? She said softly. I nodded. We need to talk. It's about Veronica. She hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. Once inside, I turned to face her. I know everything, I said bluntly. About the deal with Veronica, about the plan. The woman, Amanda, she'd introduced herself as, paled. I can explain. My mother, she's sick. I needed the money for her treatment. Veronica said it wasn't illegal, that we were just helping Jack manage his assets. Pulling out my phone, I played the recording Rita had given me. As Amanda listened to Veronica's cold voice, detailing her plan to frame her and kill Jack, all color drained from her face. When it was over, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. I had no idea, she whispered. I swear, I didn't know about any of this. What do I do? I can't go to prison, my mother needs me. I took a deep breath. Help me save Jack and stop Veronica. It's the only way to make this right. Together, we headed to Jack's office. My heart raced as we rode the elevator. Would he even listen to me? When we walked in, Jack's face registered shock, then anger. Sarah, what are you doing here? And Amanda, why are you with her? Jack, I said quickly, please. Give me 15 minutes. That's all I ask. After that, if you want me to leave, I will. I laid out everything, the photos of Veronica with her lover, the recordings of her plans. With each revelation, Jack's face grew paler. Finally, I pulled out the last pieces of evidence, a photo of Michael, and the DNA test results. This is your son, Jack, I said, my voice breaking. Those photos of me cheating? They were fake. Veronica set me up to get me out of the way. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Jack looked up, his eyes meeting mine. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have trusted you. Relief washed over me, but I knew we weren't out of the woods yet. We need to stop your mother before she hurts anyone else. With our plan in motion, Jack installed hidden cameras throughout his apartment. The next day, he casually mentioned to Veronica that he had a business trip to Europe coming up. It's a big deal, Mom, he said, feigning excitement. Could be gone for weeks. I watched the live feed from a nearby apartment I'd rented. Veronica's eyes gleamed with poorly concealed anticipation. That evening, Veronica called Amanda, demanding she come over immediately. But Amanda, as we'd planned, refused. I'm out, she said firmly. This isn't right, and I won't be part of it anymore. Veronica's face contorted with rage, but she quickly composed herself. Turning to Jack, she adopted a concerned expression. Sweetie, she cooed. With your trip coming up, don't you think it's time to update your will? Just in case, you know. Jack nodded, playing along. You're right, Mom. I should probably include you in it. My heart raced as I watched Jack sign the fake will we'd prepared. Veronica's eyes lit up with triumph. Oh, darling, she gushed. This calls for a celebration. Let me get us some wine. As Veronica disappeared into the kitchen, I zoomed in on the camera feed. My blood ran cold as I watched her pour a clear liquid into one of the glasses. When she returned, she handed the doctored glass to Jack. To your success, my dear, she said, raising her own glass. Jack pretended to take a sip, then suddenly clutched his stomach. Mom, he gasped, I don't feel so good. He stumbled to the couch and collapsed, eyes closed. Veronica waited a moment, then pulled out her phone. It's done, she hissed into it. Get over here now. Minutes later, her lover arrived. They spoke in hushed tones, discussing how to move Jack's body. As they approached him, I gave the signal. The door burst open, police flooding in. LVPD. Hands where we can see them. Jack's eyes snapped open, and he sat up. Veronica's face drained of color. But, how, she stammered. As the police cuffed Veronica and her lover, Jack looked directly at the hidden camera and winked. At the police station, I gave my statement alongside Jack and Amanda. Veronica and her accomplice were charged with attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. As we left the station, exhausted but relieved, Jack turned to me. "Sarah," he said softly, "I can't begin to tell you how sorry I am. For everything. Can we try again? I love you, and I want to be there for you and our son." "Jack," I said gently, "I'm glad we were able to work together to stop your mother. And I'm thrilled that you want to be part of our son's life. But I can't go back to how things were. You found another woman so quickly, believed the worst of me so easily. That's not the kind of love I want." Pain flashed across his face, but he nodded. "I understand. I'll always regret not trusting you. But I promise to be the best father I can be to our son." In the months that followed, Jack kept his word. He paid generous alimony and was actively involved in Michael's life. We developed a cordial co-parenting relationship, focused on our son's well-being. As for me, I returned to the skies. There was something healing about soaring above the clouds, visiting new cities and countries. Each flight felt like a fresh start, a reminder that no matter how turbulent life gets, there's always blue sky above the storms.